Hello. Welcome to the 9 Elements of a Person-Centered System. We are on our 6th session, and today we're going to talk about engaging and supporting the workforce. We'll be focusing on how to make the plan move from paper to real life. So how does it get implemented? What are some of the ways to support the people who implement plans? We're going to look at where change needs to happen. So determining where change happens at level 2, which might be the organizational level, or level 3 outside of the organization. And also how to initiate changes that are based on the learning. As you recall from our last session, we considered and discussed how plans are developed. So we talked about the elements that need to be included in effective person-centered planning and what should be in a plan that meets compliance standards for a good person-centered plan. But we don't just do plans for the sake of planning. We do them so that people have better lives. It's not just to make monitors happy. And a good side effect of person-centered planning in that process is when it's done well, we can really describe how a person wants to live their life. What is the balance between what's important to them and what's important for us? And it's important for us to remember that the plan needs to accomplish a number of things. It has to have meaning to the person whose life it is, meaning the person needs to be able to look at those outcomes or understand how things have been described and say, yes, that is what I said. That's how life needs to be. And they need to be able to see or hear what they said reflected in that planning document so that it really reads in a way that helps us understand that this is what the person wants life to look like. And it needs to be useful to the people who are implementing the plan. They need to pick it up and be able to know what their role is and what they need to do. So if they're providing support, can they look at that and know what's expected of them? What does balance look like from the person's perspective? And how to carry out the supports in a way that reflects the balance between what's important to and important for the person. But there are many people involved in a person's life who will have never seen the plan, who are maybe not there because they're providing paid support, but because they're an informal part of a support network in the person's life. And they may not know what's there, but they're an important part of helping the person live that life in balance as they describe it between what's important to them and what's important for them. So we have to be very intentional about making sure that the informal support role is supported because it's as integral as the professional role, because we want people to have better lives. That's what really this is all about. So if we're going to engage people who provide support and help the people who are using supports and services have better lives, it takes a lot more than just a good plan. We have to be really careful to recognize that there's an important role of positive social supports and informal supports in partnership with those professional supports in helping the person live that life that they desire. So we have to be mindful of the fact that the plans that are used have to be useful to the people who are implementing them. Plans that are seen as more the method to obtain payment or services and supports don't tell the whole story, because there are people who are in informal support roles who are very integral to providing those supports and services. First, the people who do develop the plans need to have the skills to do that. And we will talk a little bit later in our presentation about developing skills in people who are developing plans. And as a result, the outcomes that are listed as system outcomes rather than individual outcomes, when people don't have the skills to describe the balance of important to and important for from the person's life. But we also need to make sure that the people who know the person best, so not just the professional supports, but the people who like and admire the person, the people who support them informally, are a part of a planning process, because they know things that will help us develop good and useful plans. So think about developing plans in partnership with others. Who likes and admires the person? How have they been included in the process? And do they have a role in providing supports? And how do they know what the person describes as a life in balance. What are they doing to support the person? In addition to that, the system plans that are often disconnected from the person are plans that, when they're implemented, have no real meaning to the person. So goals that we see in plans really should flow from the outcomes. And if not, they're not connected to what matters most to the person. So how do we know what is required to support the person in terms of what matters most to them, and the balance between what's important to and important for? And finally, plans are often seen as irrelevant. They're just meeting a requirement for billing, for providing services and supports, and they don't really help the person have the life that they desire. So the planning process then becomes one that's painful for people because it's an empty ritual and no one looks forward to it. So we need to make sure that we're not just paying attention to the mechanics of planning, making sure they're due on time and that they would make a monitor happy, but that they include the information from people who are really helping the person live that life in balance as they see it.
One of the most common traps that people get into is confusing the plan with the outcome. If you think about the effort that people put into deciding what the planning process should look like, what people should know who are developing the plan, what kind of training would support that, how do we review the plan? All of that is necessary, but it can all lead people into the belief that when they've done a good plan, they're done. When they've done a good plan, they've begun, not done. And if you think of what we want to achieve, it's highlighted in the next slide. We're talking about people moving in a direction, moving from left to right. And people who are stuck at one point or the other, their outcome should help them move to the next. If they're older adults, the desired outcome may be to reduce the rate at which people move to the left. But in any case, what we're looking at is leaving a system which felt like their work was done if people were healthy and safe. If important for was addressed, without regard to what matters to the person was important too. If both what matters to the person and health and safety are addressed together, then people are in what we refer to as an okay life. But that's really not sufficient. We want people to move to a place where they're engaged with the community, and those informal supports that Tanya referenced are recruited and supported and help the person have a life that makes sense for them. But all of us want to have a life with meaning and purpose, and that should be the goal that we're working for. People are not only included, people are not only part of their communities, but they have self-defined meaning and purpose in their lives. If we're going to accomplish this, we need people who have a set of competencies. So if you look at the next slide, people at NCAPPS got together in a group that was led by Janice Tandora. We're looking at what are all the competencies that we want people to have. And if you don't have that competency yourself, you have access to it, so it contributes to the process. And you can see, as we've been through this before, that we want something that's strength-based, that cultivates connections, where people have choice and control, where there's partnership, and we're recording it in a way that is helpful to people. Next slide. But there's more, because plans that are used and useful are developed with a group of people. And if those people who are providing support to the person are not contributing, are not consulted, they will feel like there's no partnership for them. And if there's no partnership for them, there's not going to be good implementation. But at the same time, they're process experts and content experts. Those of you who know how to write plans, who've been through the training, who do it routinely, you're process experts, but aren't necessarily a content expert. If I was developing a plan with Bob and I met him for the first time, I would be a process expert. I would need to spend some time with Bob and the people who know Bob in order to do a good plan. But I still wouldn't be a real content expert, not like Bob's brother, not like the people who support him day to day. And they are those who know what the plan should say and accomplish. We can pull the information together, synthesize it in a way that states it in a clear and powerful way. Next slide. We want to have a system that reflects a few assumptions. First, that people should have power over, that we should leave a system of power over and go to a system of power with. When we have a system of power over, we know what's best for the person. We are quite comfortable in making decisions for the person. If we have a system of power with, we're looking at what support does the person need in order to make an informed choice. And what we're seeking is informed choice. When people have choice and control, they're also going to have purpose and meaning. When there's power over, people are satisfied when people are healthy and safe. They are not necessarily focused on what's important to, or they will describe what's important to without consulting the person. If there's power with, people have a clear idea of how they can move towards a life of purpose and meaning, how the person can become part of their community. They know how to explore that and work toward it. There's a real danger in systems that are based in power over, that the person will be in an environment that they find noxious, an environment that triggers them. And you'll see behaviors that really reflect trauma and reflect nonverbal critiques of the services that are rendered. When people give up and tolerate that, that's a tolerated environment. Neither of those are acceptable. You want to have supportive or healing environments, and you want a language that promotes equality. And whether we have power with or power over is reflected in our language. So when we do training, we talk to people about what kind of language do they use. If we talk about people with labels, oh, I work with people who have this label, or I have the people who have this issue. Are we talking about the person, or are we talking about the disability? We should always be talking about the person first. And do we have language that reflects our control? I let this person have 20 minutes a day of alone time. I've allowed this person to do this. Or are we using language that tells people what to do, when to do it, as opposed to making suggestions? And do we use language that objectifies people, reflects ownership? Do we use language that objectifies the person from the perspective of, it's time for you to be toileted, it's time for you to be showered, it's time for you to be dressed, where the person's the object of the process rather than a participant? And do we use jargon? How many of you went on an outing this last weekend? And do we use childlike names, where the nickname is a diminutive and we talk about people going potty? But there's also power with language. Next slide. Where we reflect people's gifts and talents. We talk about, when we introduce people, we talk about what they can do, what their strengths are, rather than what they can't do. We talk about capabilities. So we talk about how people communicate where they don't use words. And we use language that's inclusive, where we're talking about, let's help you decide, which would you like to do? And we remind people rather than prompt people. We ask rather than tell. We also refer to the people that use the services as the people I work with, or the people I work for, or the people I support. We help people eat rather than make them the object of the process. And we use everyday language. So instead of going on an outing, we go to eat at the Olive Garden. We go to the mall. We talk about people's preferred name, talk about people being safe, talk about supporting somebody to use the restroom rather than going potty. And we do this in a way where we're modeling the behavior without being the language police. But we want to edit all of our policy documents. We want to review all the material that people read and see, does it reinforce power over, or does it reinforce power with?
So thank you, Michael. I think it's really helpful that language is a nice lead in to implement a plan that's really helping us bring that paper to life. One of the things that we often see in plans is language that is system language, some of that power over language. And when we have that in plans, and that's what those who are supporting the person are reading and implementing, it gives us subconscious focus of, I have control over you. When we're telling our staff that they can allow, or they can let, or we use system language about outings and going into the community, this really gives this impression that I'm in charge. What we really want to think about is using the plan as a conduit to really make that power with happen for somebody, so that we are on equal footing. And in order to do that, we really need to think about that plan as being a roadmap, and really being the guiding force to really thinking about how we are specifically going to support someone. And when we do that, we can really make the paper come to life and support people to have the lives that are meaningful and productive and purpose-driven for somebody. And as we think about this, if we go to the next slide, what we really need to be mindful of is where are and how are we using the content experts in somebody's life to really make sure that they know how to use the plan, that the plan has specific information. A lot of times what we tend to do when we develop plans is we may paraphrase what somebody says and we put it into systemic terms, We may have those power over type statements where we are letting, allowing, and telling people what to do rather than discussing or sharing or figuring out how to do this together. The plan really is that roadmap. Early on in my career, I was supporting someone who had a goal to go shopping, and he wanted to go clothes shopping. So he wanted to go to the local mall, and that was great. But the plan to go shopping didn't tell me that Howard wanted to buy clothes. Didn't tell me where Howard wanted to buy clothes. Howard said he wanted to go to the mall, to a certain store. I was new to the area. I had no clue where the mall was. And this was before the days of GPS and all of that easy ways to get places. So I actually asked Howard how to get to the mall. And he gave me specific directions on how to do that. And if we think about this as a roadmap and making use of the plan, that we have the right information in the plan, then we know what to do. How many of you have gotten directions to someplace? It says, oh, you go 1 mile and then you turn left. And you're at a mile and you don't see that left turn and you're a little lost? Or would you rather have go about 2 miles, when you see the Conoco gas station, you turn left at the Conoco gas station? The specifics really help those who are providing the supports to people get it right. And so we really need to think about, do we have plans in place that let those who are providing supports get it right? Or do we have plans that leave those providing supports guessing what that means? When we say John needs to exercise, what does exercise look like for John? Or does the staff say, oh, or those who's providing support say, this is the exercise I think you should do? So we want to make sure that when we are making use of the plans, that it has the right information, which means we need to have the right people contributing that information so we have the specifics. And as we do that, we need to be mindful of the fact that we are going to be learning new things as we try things. So do we have a way to recognize and use that new learning and build it back into the planning document, or the document that's guiding how services and supports are provided, in a way that makes sense for the person? So when we think about those core competencies, of those 5 core competencies of person-centered planning, we really want to think about that last one, which is all about documentation and implementation and monitoring. How do we have that information in such a specific way that we get it right? When we get it right, it's no longer a piece of paper, it's leading to better lives. And we can get to that meaningful life that arrow showed us. We can go to the next slide. One of the biggest challenges we have right now is that it's hard to do if there's no one to do it. We are in a national labor crunch, more so than we've ever been in before. We've always had a labor shortage in our industry, but not to the degree that it is right now. So one of the things we really want to think about, and this actually is information that was presented just recently at the mid-year conference from NASDDS, to really think about, what is that labor force really looking at and how is it impacting us? And some of the stuff that came out through HSRI says that we need to have realistic job previews so that people understand what it is that we need to be looking at, that there needs to be a match between the individual skills and the person's need for support. And it goes beyond the skills. It's not just skills. Skills don't make people happy. We also need to be thinking about, from a matching standpoint, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is what sort of interests do people have? What sort of personality characteristics do people have that can really make those skills work well for the person that's being supported? That there needs to be competent and supportive supervision, that those who are providing the support know what to do, know how to do it, and when there are challenges, they know what to be done differently so that things can work better. So there needs to be competent and supportive supervision. We need to look at the organizational culture, which will be a topic that we will actually devote more time to in our next session, because that is a huge issue we need to think about. There needs to be respect, recognition, and career ladders for folks. Some people are very happy at staying at a level where they are supporting people on a day-to-day basis. Other people are looking at, how can I move up through the company? And are there opportunities to make that happen? Is there good training and credentialing to really help people develop their competencies and their skill levels? Do we have pay and benefits that is a livable wage? And what is the ratio of supervisors to those who are providing the direct care? Is it in such a way that people can get access to that supervisor when they need that support? Or are people stretched thin and doing too much so that there is no support? And the only support that's provided is when there's a crisis. We really need to think about what can we do to make that happen. This is going to be a long-term issue. Our whole labor force is something that we really need to look at. What can we do differently as we move forward in this process? But these are things that we really need to pay attention to, because it is a reality, and that reality is really impacting those who are using our services and supports in our system. So how can we do things differently than perhaps we've done in the past? A lot of our work that we do, we actually look for those in the field who have the knowledge and expertise. And someone that we have found that is very helpful in really thinking about what can we do to improve retention, improve opportunities in supporting those under our supervision and who are providing those services and support is Marcus Buckingham. So if we could go to the next slide. And Marcus Buckingham worked for Gallup. He identified a lot of things. These 6 things in particular are things that really resonated in improving retention. And this actually came from a Gallup poll in 1999, that these 6 questions really helped figure out, am I happy with my job? And comes down to, do I know what is expected of me at work? Do I know what the requirements are? Do I have the materials and equipment needed to do my work right? Are those resources available to me? At work, do I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day? And sometimes that goes beyond what's in a written job description. So we really want to think about this. Think about your own life in the past 7 days. Have you received recognition or praise for good work? Does your supervisor or someone at work seem to care about you as a person? And at work, do my opinions seem to count? These 6 things really let people know that they are valued. In 1999, that was a long time ago, and these things are still relevant. One of the things about Marcus Buckingham is he keeps things moving forward. He's had many books. His recent book, which actually just came out in 2019, is called The 9 Lives About Work, a free-thinking leader's guide to the real world. And he's expanded beyond just improving retention, but started to look at teamwork. So if we go to the next slide, he says these 8 statements really are good indicators if there's good team performance. I am really enthusiastic about the mission of my company. At work, I clearly understand what is expected of me. In my team, I am surrounded by people who share my values. I have the chance to use my strengths every day at work. My teammates have my back. I know I will be recognized for excellent work, and I have great confidence in my company's future. Some of these statements are building upon what he presented in 1999. 20 years later, we want to think about, how does this really improve team performance? And one of the things that really struck me by quoting this book is that Marcus Buckingham said, people don't leave bad jobs. They leave because of bad bosses, poor management, and people who don't appreciate their value. So people will stay with a bad company if they have a good team, but they may leave a very good company if they have a bad team. So we really want to think about, what are we doing to create that type of support for those who are providing supports to people using our services and supports in our system. Now, just want to take a moment, and if we go to the next slide, to have you pause and reflect yourself, thinking about that quote of people don't leave bad jobs. They leave because of bad bosses, poor management, and who don't appreciate their value. I want you to take a moment and think about all the jobs you've had. What really contributed to you wanting to stay in that job? What made you want to leave that job? And do these reasons align with what we've just learned from Marcus Buckingham's research? Those 8 statements about a good team, which helps improve retention. So take a moment and answer those 3 questions. Okay, next slide. Hopefully those answers were helpful as you are thinking about your own careers. As we think about this, both paid and unpaid supporters who implement plans really need to know 3 things. What do they need to know? And is that planning document in such a way that it provides that roadmap? Do people know what is expected of them? And are those expectations clear so that the person can get it right? Do they know what they need to do in regard to those expectations to make sure that they actually happen? And if they are not meeting those expectations, do they know what they need to do differently so that they can get it right? So how must they be supported in order to make sure that they are getting it right? these three key questions are things that we could really provide some of the person-centered thinking skills to really make happen for somebody so that they have the opportunity to get it right. Now I'm going to turn it over to Mary Lou, who's going to talk a little bit about how this fits into the self-assessment and where you are as an organization.
Thanks so much, Bob. It's great to see everybody again. And on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about engaging supporters in the system self-assessment. And as Tanya had mentioned in the introduction, the supporters are really several different groups of people. They may be direct support professionals, they may be direct care staff who are paid to provide support to the people in your system, but they may also be caregivers who are not paid. So they may be family members or sometimes neighbors or just longtime family friends who have provided support to the individual, know them very well, and are routinely spend time with somebody. So as we're looking at the self-assessment, we really do break this down into two different groups of people and thinking about it in slightly different ways. So you'll see that in section 6, we specifically address the workforce. And part 3 of that, so 6.3, addresses the direct care workforce. And then in section 7, when we're really looking at collaboration and partnership, there's a specific piece that looks at 7.2, supporting caregivers, which expands it into those who are not paid or people who provide natural supports on a routine basis to an individual. On the next slide, I wanted to take a minute and mention that anytime you're using the self-assessment instrument, at the very beginning, there's a section on definitions. We found that it was really important in using the instrument across all 50 states in the US, that we took a moment to help people describe and define in your own system what's meant by certain terms. And direct care workforce is one of those. So for example, in your particular system, in the work that you actually do, is there a group of people who are paid to provide support on a regular routine basis to the individuals in your system? How do you refer to them? Some places refer to people as direct support professionals. Sometimes it is the paid caregivers. Sometimes it is home health care workers. In some systems, they may actually call them options counselors or personal options counselors. There's a lot of different phrases that are used, but essentially it is the people who on a regular day-to-day basis or on some routine basis provide the direct support one-on-one or in small groups with the people who are looking for services or supports. So it's important that you, whatever that phrase is that works in your system, that be the group of people that you have in mind. So on the next slide, we'll take a closer look at section 6.3, in which this really does evolve from looking at having the viewpoint, if you will, that, well, that's really just the responsibility of the service provider agencies. And my company or my agency or my role really doesn't have anything to do with direct care workforce. And evolving that from that point all the way up to really the whole system recognizing its role in supporting the ongoing learning and especially the professional development of the direct care workforce, and seeing that how you do that demonstrates and underscores the value that they provide in the system. When we think about how do you support the direct care workforce in your role as a leader, and you think about how you can impact the methods that are used for that, think a little bit about several of the issues and the topics that have been raised today by all 3 of my colleagues. Tanya mentioned it. Michael really went into some of the details about power over and power with, and Bob certainly explained it in the last couple of sections on looking at where understanding from Marcus Buckingham. And that really is the idea that power over and power with applies also to how you approach the direct support professionals in your workforce, whether or not. So we think of power. So there's an old adage that knowledge is power. And we have this expectation that if we give away our power, it will diminish the amount of power I have and turn it all over to somebody else. But we like to help people think about knowledge as power in a multiplier rather than a reducer. So in other words, when you share knowledge and when you share experience and skills and expand knowledge or skills with more people, it increases the amount of power that is shared by everybody. So it really doesn't decrease the amount of power that's available. We also want to think about, and when Michael mentioned objectifying and jargon and how we use language to demonstrate power over and power with, thinking about how we refer to direct care staff and to the role that they play is really an important piece of raising the authority level, if you will, and raising the value of direct care staff, which really does contribute to, as Bob mentioned, why people leave. We are in a place right now where we're really very frequently and very quick to pin the reason we are challenged by turnover with direct care staff. We're very quick to pin that on wages and benefits, but many organizations have begun to recognize and are beginning to really write about the organizational culture's role in turnover, and particularly in tenure and retention. So a good example of that, when we talk about language that is diminishing language, thinking about the phrase that became very common in our work, and that is, we just need warm bodies. And so it's very demeaning and very devaluing for leaders to talk that way about the direct care staff, those frontline workers who are, supporting teenagers in behavioral health homes, the people who are working with in domestic violence shelters that we're having such a hard time keeping, and even finding people to work, particularly in those 24-hour, those positions that require 24 hours a day, 7 days a week of support. When we talk that way about people as just warm bodies, it kind of reveals our values and reveals how we're thinking about the importance of their jobs and the importance of the knowledge and the skill that they bring to their jobs. So this section in the self-assessment is really focused on making sure that we are clearly supporting people's learning and professional development, and then seeking them their feedback and their input into policy development across the whole system. So section 7.2 really addresses supporting caregivers, and the same is there are similar principles here, but it is expanded to also include whether or not we are looking at unpaid caregivers. So frequently family members or longtime friends, sometimes it's neighbors, people who are providing natural supports. In section 7.2, when we're talking about supporting caregivers, we're looking at moving from policy development that is exclusively done by professionals and people who are paid to lead the system, up through developmental milestones around assuring that caregivers regularly identify the changes that are needed and give advisement on the policy decisions that will support direct care staff as well as unpaid caregivers to continue to provide that vital support on a regular basis. So the last part of this is the next slide. You'll see some thoughts that we wanted to have you thinking about as a leader. What is it that you put in place to assure that anybody, all people who provide support, are listened to and that they're actually heard from? So it's one thing to say, yes, we listen to them, but do we intentionally design opportunities to hear from the people who are routinely supporting others and make sure that they know that they're valued? And looking at all of this, the last slide that we'll talk about briefly here is this idea of implementation. Bob and Michael and Tanya have all mentioned the importance of implementation of plans, and that it is those direct care staff and or the unpaid caregivers who really are carrying out on a regular basis. They're carrying out the details that we find in person-centered plans. It's also important for us to think about implementation in terms of strategy. So you'll see across all of the person-centered, the self-assessment tool for states, you'll see several places where we really talk about implementation and the role of leadership in assuring that plans can actually be implemented by the people on the front lines. So section 1.2, when we talk about strategy development, section 2.1, when we really talk about changing the culture of your system, there's places that address implementation. And there are several other places where we talk about building in collaborative partnerships. So all of section 7, for example, as the aligning mechanisms that really help you to support the supporters and assure that person-centered practices are being implemented. So as you, as a leader in your system, as you are looking for ways to kind of question, are we doing as much as we can? These various sections within the self-assessment tool can help you rate and kind of look at where do we start? What do we need to do next? And what are the goals that we might need to set for our system in really accomplishing this system's change? Now I'm going to turn it back over to, I believe it's Bob.
And just to wrap this up, it's very nice thinking about how Mary Lou has pulled this all together to really look at how does this all work so that we can make it successful for those who are providing the supports. The plan really is the place where that can happen. And so we really need to make sure that the plans that we have for those who are providing support, whether it is a paid or unpaid supporter, that the plans really are relevant, that the plan wasn't developed as something to meet a requirement and it was an empty ritual just because, oh, it's annual planning time, we got to do the annual plan. But it's relevant that really helps everybody supporting the person know what to do on that day-to-day effort to make life meaningful. And that it really is accurate and insightful and is not a cut and paste function so everyone's doing the same thing. We are all different people. We all have different ways we want things done in our lives. And do the supporters know what that is for the person? And in order to do that, plan must give supporters clear directions on how to best support the person in a way that makes sense for that person. And that the instructions on how to help the person achieve their outcomes really is clear. And that those instructions change as we learn new things, as we have new experiences, we have different insights. Are we taking the time to really capture that information and make those modifications so the instructions evolve so that the person really has the life that they want? And that those who are providing the support to make that meaningful life happen know what their role is and how to make that happen for them, whether you're in a paid or unpaid position to support that person. So I'm going to turn it over to Tanya to give some insights about ways that we can make that happen.
Thanks, Bob. You know, if we take the approach that everybody can teach and everybody can learn, we have an opportunity to break out of the mold of just taking care of someone. And that requires that we are consistent in making sure that people have the skills they need and providing the supports that reflect the balance from the person's perspective. A lot of times as professionals, we get a lot of training on first aid and CPR and incident reporting, and all of those things are necessary and they are important, but they really address more what is important for a person, not what's important to them. So if we teach people to have good conversations, to do good person-centered discovery, that is to be present with a person in a way that helps you understand from their perspective what life in balance looks like, and then learn about the person and act on what we learn, that's the approach that we want to take and perpetuate. And whether someone is paid to provide those services or not paid to provide informal supports, it's an opportunity to learn and develop by using those skills in partnership with one another. So sometimes we need to think about how we can expand training opportunities to include family members and other unpaid supports. And sometimes we need to do a much better job at listening to the people who are providing those informal supports, because often what they're learning can help us refine how we support the person. So people providing supports may go beyond the natural supports we often think about. So family, I think, often is exactly where our mind goes when we think about natural supports. But we could also think of people in the category of organic supports, people that we all come in contact with on a daily basis who may offer support to us. Are there certain people that in your life you look forward to seeing on a daily basis, maybe at the grocery store, because they support you in a way that works for you? They remember something about you. They are happy when they see you. Maybe it's the cashier at the deli counter, or the pharmacy. Are we thinking of those people who are providing supports on a daily basis as well? So with the skills, we may start to focus by maybe beginning with the management skills. And that's really about not skills managers use, but managing roles in a person's life. So thinking about that, we might begin with something like a donut. And a donut would help us provide clarity of expectations around accountability. What are we supposed to do and what are we not supposed to do? Within informal supports, often this happens very naturally. People are in a person's life, they're drawn to one another, maybe because they have a familial link, but maybe because they share interests and they enjoy one another's company. But with professional supports, we want to pay attention to creating good matches, because it's a lot easier for someone to support someone that has similar interests, or being paired with someone that has similar interests to you, or things that you have in common, rather than someone you have no similarities with. But once the implementation begins, the learning needs to be captured with every interaction. So everyday learning skills may help us gather some of that meaningful information about what actually occurred, instead of and what did not occur. This helps to make changes in real time to better support the person. And in doing so, we bring our discovery skills into play, because this provides opportunity for new learning to happen. And all along the way, we need to pay attention to who's doing the supporting, because often people who are in those informal roles learn a lot more that's more helpful in helping the person have a life in balance as they describe it. So if we started with the donut sort, remember that it's about the clarity of expectations in terms of who provides supports in what areas. So it really helps people get clear about that. And it gives us opportunities to also understand that for every person in a role of support, whether they're paid or not, that their judgment and creativity may come into play in a way that helps the person have more of that balance in their life. So in that center of the donut, if it's what we do, so that the donut would define what we do, using judgment and creativity might be how we do it. And this defines what is beyond our responsibility, stuff that we're trying and figuring out what works. But it also helps us establish accountability, shared accountability, and accountability on an individual basis. We might use a matching skill for a lot of different reasons. For informal supports, as I said, it might happen naturally. When my dad needed support at the end of his life, I was really good at helping him connect to the people he loved and the people who could run an errand with him or stay with him on a day when maybe he was weak from chemotherapy. My sister was great at scheduling all the professional care that my dad needed. So between us, we were able to tag team that and provide a lot of care management in a very informal way. But you could also use a matching skill to be sure that those who are providing supports from a professional aspect are compatible with the person. You know, skill knowledge alone doesn't make someone compatible. It makes sure that we're paying attention to what's important for someone. So recently we were conducting an assessment, an organizational assessment with a provider, and one of the overwhelming contributors of why staff stayed at that particular organization was because they had a good relationship with the person that they supported. So organizations who pay attention to this know that it also helps staff feel more valued and they really don't turn over staff quite as quickly. We can also use it in looking at people who are living together. And if we supervise someone, we can can use the matching skill to support them to have more fun at work. Often what people are good at might not be what is listed in their job description. So if we know someone has skills around something, for example, arts and crafts, and they can connect with people and help people with an artistic project, or take people on a trip where they get to do something in the art realm, we know that that person is going to be well matched to that, and they're therefore going to have more fun at work when they're supporting people. We should use our everyday learning skills every day. As we're engaging with people, as we spend time with people, we should be learning from those interactions. And we should also be listening to the learning of the people who may be providing informal supports, and including what they're learning in refining supports for the person. It's a way for us to assist ourselves in analyzing what's happening as we support people, and refine the supports as a result of it.
If we're going to have a person-centered system, we need to have person-centered practices. And person-centered practices are rooted in skills. So Tanya just illustrated two of the skills, overviewed a few others that really help in having person-centered practices. So how are we going to have those skills be present? Well, one thing is to make person-centered thinking training universal, so that everybody goes through it. It can be tailored to different groups, but everybody goes through it. Unfortunately, though, if all we do is training, we fall into one of the other traps. All of us have been through lots of training, and much of the training has been helpful. But if you go into training and then you walk back into your job without anything else happening, training typically becomes like the rock in the pond. Really good training is like a really big rock, makes a really big wave, but the pond goes still in a short period of time. The skills, if they're not used, go away. So if we look at the next slide, we think about this. Training has phases. And if you think about exposure, pretty much everybody has had exposure to person-centered practices. Unfortunately, if all you have is exposure, what you get is the use of the labels. So people use the terms. And in fact, now it would be you'd be very hard pressed to find anyone who would say they were not person-centered. But if people know how to use the skills, they achieve competence. And that's what you want training to do, is to bring people to competence. But competence without practice goes back to exposure. Competence with practice becomes habit. If people see where the skills are useful, how to apply them, and routinely apply them, then it becomes habit. And you think with habit, you're done. But habit's weakness is dependent on the presence of a person. So if Tanya were your teammate, she used the skills routinely wherever they applied, she would be demonstrating the power of the habit. But if she is transferred, if she gets promoted, does the skill knowledge go away? And if the answer is it does, then you haven't quite finished your work, because the skills need to be embedded. They need to become part of the organizational culture. They need to become part of the way we do work, so that whenever an issue comes up where the skill would be useful, it's used. One of the ironies in this is we found that people who use the skills to the extent that they become embedded, the skills have lost their names. It's how they do their work, not how they do a particular thing, not a label for a particular thing. So the goal here is to have skills be used so routinely they become part of culture. So what we're looking for is making sure that people are scanning so that they are looking where the skill will make a difference, that you have champions who know how to do this, who are supporting the implementation of the skills, and that managers notice when the skill is being used and praise people where the skill is used effectively. And that reinforcement will make it much more likely that the skill gets to be used. And then it has to have an outcome. And one of the things we want people to do is engage in learning. And learning is not random. Learning needs to be fitted into a structure. And the person-centered thinking skills give you an idea of the structure that's possible and the structure that can be helpful. So we want people to learn, but we want the learning to be acted on. So there's a complete learning cycle. And moving towards a person-centered system becomes part of what is happening with the system.
So if we're going to create and maintain a learning culture within the organization and the system, we have to take into account a number of things. We might find ourselves engaged in side-by-side usage of skills, in modeling what we expect, and also really in partnering with people who may be providing informal supports to include what they're learning. So as people who are directly providing support, what we would call a level 1 role, learn what is working and what's not working as they support people, and they share their experiences or the successes that they're having or the challenges that they might be facing with leadership. The leaders then can use that information to create and drive culture change, create and drive policy change and procedural changes that help what we call a level 2 change to happen, which may help many people in that organization be impacted beneficially by the change that happened. So more person-centered supports are possible across the organization. And at the same time, we want to look for opportunities to partner with and also exert pressure at level 3 outside of the organization so that change can impact many more lives. So we have to avoid cutting and pasting at all costs. We want to make sure that plans are updated as we learn and as the people who are in those direct support roles are learning, whether they are paid to be in the role or not, whether they are a learner who is an informal support in the person's life. So what we're doing is growing a plan. We're updating it. We're not repeating what is, not starting from scratch. It's also important to remember that a first plan, which may feel like a first plan, it's okay. It provides good information, but it may not be as robust, becomes much more insightful as we do that everyday learning. And we start to refine not only the supports, but start to understand the outcomes more intently from the person's perspective. Outcomes have to be tied to what's important to the person, what sits at the core of that person. And this happens by using the information that we've discovered about someone, and it comes from the people who are providing the support directly. If they see their work, if the person who is providing supports and services sees their work and the knowledge that they're gaining and working with someone as being used, it reinforces them to do that more and in feeling valued in the role that they're in, and not just someone who is a cog in a wheel, that they can really be an important part of that person having a life in balance as they see it. This really builds the desire for people who are in support roles to stay in those roles because they feel an important place in helping someone's life be a better life.
From the system perspective, we really need to be mindful of what are we doing to support all folks at all levels of the system. And if we are really dedicated to supporting our workforce, first thing we really need to be mindful of the fact is that person-centeredness is at all levels. It's not just for those who are using services and supports. As a system, we may say, we're going to be a person-centered system, and those who are using our services and supports are going to be treated in a person-centered way. And we forget the fact that those who are providing and delivering those services and supports also need to be treated in a person-centered way. Because if they're not, it's never going to reach the people who are using our services and supports. So we really need to be mindful of the fact that this is for everyone. And that means we may need to take a hard look in the mirror to say, what do I need to be doing differently to support people in a person-centered way, to support those I supervise, to support my coworkers, to support those who are delivering direct care and those who are using services and supports. So if we go to the next slide, what we really need to remember is that the person is the expert. The person is that content expert, the one who has the knowledge and information about what really works well for someone. And that person may be the person, first and foremost, the one who is using our services and supports. Secondly, it's the people who are delivering services and supports. They are an expert if they've got that relationship with the person. Those who are supervising those delivering services and support, what can we do to make it effective and efficient? What we really need to be thinking of is, what are we doing to help process experts become content experts? And what are we doing to help content experts become process experts? It really is this shift from we all have our own role and we all have our own silo, to the fact that we are all in this together, and how do we learn together, and how do we select the right expert based upon the information that we need. That leads us to this concept of having power with rather than power over someone. As Mary Lou said, knowledge is power. And as she also said, which I am a firm believer of, if we all have the knowledge, we all have the power. And if we all have the power, we can do great things. So really thinking about how we spread that so we all have that power with each other and are working together for the common good. And what that leads to is a clear demonstration of, I respect you, I value you, I want to make sure that you've got the information you need to do the best job possible. And when people feel valued, they stay longer. So what are we doing to really think about that? Thinking about those 6 initial questions that Marcus Buckingham had identified in 1999 and how we evolved them to team performance in 2019. How do we feel valued? Think about the answers that you came up with when you were reflecting on those statements. What are we doing? Are we giving people feedback? Are we praising people for things that they do well? And we're specific about that so they know what it is that they did well so they can do it again. That's ways that we can make people feel valued. So a simple value could be, thank you. I appreciate you. What are we doing to make that happen? Go to that next slide. So as we close out, we really need to think about what can we do from a level 1, level 2, level 3 standpoint. If we really want to support our workforce, are we advocating for legislative action on livable wages so people don't have to work 2 or 3 jobs in order to make ends meet? Are we creating a career ladder for folks? Are we role modeling the use of person-centered skills and creating a learning culture for folks? You know, one of the things, and we will talk about this in our next session, the learning culture is how we really recognize the fact that we are going to make mistakes. And what can we learn from those mistakes? You know, I'll often tell people that we work with humans. I don't know if you know this or not, but humans are a hot mess. We don't always get it right. So how can we learn from our mistakes so we don't do them over and over, rather than pointing fingers and blaming people for things? That's a little bit different. People are afraid to make mistakes. The only thing they learn when fingers are being pointed at them is how to hide my mistakes so I don't get in trouble. So let's really recognize that we are modeling person-centered skills and we're going to make mistakes and we're going to learn from that. Are we promoting creativity in the partnerships for those who are providing supports? And again, that's across the board. How are we really creating those partnerships to recognize that we are in this together? And from a systems standpoint, can we explore the flexibility in the interpretation of rules and regs? Rules and regs really have a lot of wiggle room if we really look at them. It's when we start to interpret those rules and regs that flexibility becomes more and more narrow. So what are we doing to really go back to the intent of the rule and reg, rather than perhaps someone's interpretation of the rule and reg? And how do we work in partnership to really explore that together? I would encourage you to take a look at some of the plans, to think about what the language looks like in those annual plans and the required documentation. Is it some of that power over language, which is saying, I am in control, I am in charge? Or is it power with language, which really says, we are in this together to help you have the life that you want and get the services and supports you need to make that happen? Because we are a needs-based system and that's not going to go away. But how do we fit it together so that the important 2 is in context with the important 4, so we can really support people in a way that makes sense? And are we using language that is respectful and demonstrates that? These are some things that we can explore from a systemic standpoint to really think about what opportunities lay before us as we move forward. So we can go to that next slide. So from a next steps standpoint, take a look at what practices are in place within your organization that really promotes workforce engagement. Are we really creating that power with atmosphere that's really encouraging good teams and good retention? And if they are present, how do we know that they're successful? Just because they're there doesn't mean that they're actually being used to their full potential. So examine that within your own organization. And we'll talk about that when we come back together. And identify one thing where you think you can make some changes based upon your circle of control to improve workforce engagement. We all are in contact with someone else, whether it's a coworker, whether it's someone we supervise, whether it's someone who's receiving services and supports. What's one thing that you can make a change with to improve that workforce engagement? And we will come back and discuss that on July 25th from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock East Coast time. And we will have our World Café there, and we'll look forward to hearing all of the great learning that's occurred between now and then. So thank you for your time today. We look forward to seeing you on the 25th. If you have any questions or comments, our information is up on the screen, and please use the Teams channel to send any questions you might have. Hopefully you found this helpful today, and we look forward to seeing you on the 25th. Thank you.